On behalf of the Del Mar Foundation, welcome to this evening's presentation on octopuses. This is part of our series of lectures known as DMF Talks that was started about 10 years ago. And I'm very delighted to introduce this evening's speaker, Dr. Jenny Hofmeister. She's worked as an environmental scientist at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife since 2018. And before that, she was a postdoc scholar at Scripps Institute of Oceanography. Her Ph.D. research at UC Berkeley explored the behavior and ecology of the California two-spot octopus around Catalina Island. And her current research expands on this work by tracking the movement of these octopuses in Southern California and understanding how they can affect abalone restoration. You can learn a lot more and see some interesting videos and photos and so forth on Dr. Hofmeister's website. But my favorite short bio of Dr. Hofmeister is just 7 words, and it is the tagline on her website. And here are those 7 words: marine scientist, octopus expert, and aspiring mermaid. Please join me in giving a warm Del Mar welcome to our speaker, Dr. Jenny Hofmeister.
Thank you so much. You know, if I could just grow gills, then my aspirations of mermaidhood would be realized, but alas. All right, is it showing up? The obligatory
yes.
call. Excellent. Yes. All right, well, thank you so much for joining me this evening to talk about one of my favorite subjects in the entire world, which are octopuses. And the plural of octopus is in fact octopuses and not octopi, because it's a Greek root, not a Latin root. And if you want to sound scientific, the scientific plural is octopods, so you can really impress your friends. I am currently an environmental scientist for the Department of Fish and Wildlife, but my background is in academia, and I've kind of used that background to integrate fishery management and interactions between fish species and not fish species. So I'll just share a little bit about me. I grew up in California, born and bred. I grew up in the Bay Area. My grandfather was a scuba diver. My dad was a scuba diver. I'm a scuba diver, so I have a history of marine interest. When I was in high school, I first started volunteering at the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito, Northern California, which is the largest marine mammal center rescue place in the world. This is me with an elephant seal on the left and a harbor seal on the right. It was great, but mammals are all cute and cuddly, but really when I went to college and started to learn more about the complexity of different organisms, I learned that invertebrates, things without backbones, are way weirder and way cooler. And that kind of set me on my trajectory toward octopus research. So I went to school at UCLA, where I had the privilege of studying abroad in a few places and learning a lot about different ecosystems. After UCLA, I grew up from a Bruin baby bear to a big bear at Cal. And got my PhD from UC Berkeley. My grandparents met at Cal, so they were very pleased when I decided to go there for graduate work. And this is where I really started studying specifically octopuses, their role in the California kelp forest ecosystem, their behavior, their movement. Once I graduated from Berkeley, I moved to San Diego, where I've stayed as a Scripps at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. Continue to study octopus and kind of working into the abalone restoration world. And now I am at the Department of Fish and Wildlife, where I mostly am working right now with the lobster fishery and abalone restoration and octopus effects on abalone restoration. So yeah, I'm an invertebrate scientist through and through. Things with backbones drool, things without backbones rule. So I'll just a brief overline of the things I'll talk about. I'll talk a little bit about movement around Catalina Island, what we're doing to understand the octopus response to the restoration of endangered abalone in Southern California, tracking octopus movement using a technique called passive acoustic telemetry, and then finally this kind of why should we care about all this big question, which I always like to end my talks with. Oh, and I didn't hit the buttons. There you go. That's all the things. But first, to really set the stage as to my argument that octopuses are the coolest animals on the planet, I want to share with you a little bit about what octopuses, their cool and crazy features. So first up is looking at their anatomy, their body structure. They have 8 arms, and there is a difference between an arm and a tentacle. An arm has suckers all the way down it, while a tentacle only has suckers on the very tip. So octopus have 0 tentacles and 8 arms. Squid have 8 arms and 2 tentacles. You know, we're scientists, we like to define things. They have 9 brains. They have a centralized brain kind of near where their eyes are, and then they have, each arm is effectively its own brain, which is truly wild. They have 3 hearts, one that is responsible for pumping their blood through the entirety of their body, and then each gill gets its own heart responsible for flushing fresh blood across the gill surface. And they only have 1 hard part. And where this matters is their ability to get in and out of things. So this is one of my favorite videos, is by a lab, I think in Korea, but I'm not remembering now, where they set this up fantastically, where they made a clear obstacle course for the octopus to go through. So you really could get a sense of the way it's squishing its body. And anywhere where that 1 hard part, their beak, which is found on the underside of all of their arms, kind of right there in the middle, anywhere where that hard part, that beak can fit, the entire body can fit. That's its only limitation. So when you think about an octopus that you might see in an aquarium, like the giant Pacific octopus, you know, they get pretty big, 100+ pounds, and their beak is maybe the size of a tennis ball. So tennis ball or to softball size. So anything that's about that size, that entire giant 120-pound octopus can squeeze through. So it is an incredible ability. You can imagine that it is challenging to keep them in captivity because of this, but very cool nonetheless. So the next part that makes them the coolest animal on the planet is their taste and their touch, which is inherently intertwined. So they have taste buds all over all of their suckers. So they are tasting everything they touch. That would be as if our feet had taste buds and you tasted everything that you walked on. So there's a tremendous amount of sensory information that's coming into them kind of at all times, which is where we go back to this idea of they have 9 brains. Each arm is functioning kind of like its own brain. And what that means is that each arm can kind of do its own thing without ever talking to the main brain. It's like our reflexes, right? If you hit your knee goes up, that's a reflex, and that communication is really just happening within those leg muscles. Your brain is not sending that information. Now take that and multiply it by about 1,000, and you have what an octopus does. So an octopus arm on its own, without ever communicating with the main brain, can identify what food is, what food isn't, a bad stimulus, you know, go away, food, bring it to the mouth, without ever talking to the main brain, which leaves the main brain up for more complicated tasks like coordinating all of those arms, all of those suckers together. They can control each sucker completely independently of the other one. And, you know, we can try to do that with our fingers, but, you know, you're never really moving a finger independently from the other ones. So it's a skill that we just don't have. And this is kind of demonstrating. I'm going to scooch forward on this video just a little bit. So this is an octopus that was placed in a jar that has learned how to open up the jar from the inside, which I don't think I could do because I don't have the ability to suction cup on anything. So, and with that incredible ability to manipulate their environment, the ability to manipulate objects and move things around and do this is one of the precursors that scientists think lead to intelligence, to being smart. You know, think about, we are incredibly good at manipulating objects with these glorious opposable thumbs. Octopuses are incredibly good at manipulating objects, manipulating the world around them. And so it's thought that that ability to manipulate the world has been one of the contributors to them being so smart. Yeah, and there he goes. All right. Now, we can't talk about octopus without talking about their eyes and their camouflage. So I'm going to talk about eyes first. Looking at the structure of their eye is a really cool example of what we call convergent evolution. So where you have two things on totally different sides of the evolutionary tree, and through evolution, through natural selection, have kind of come to the same conclusion for how to get something to work. So this is the structure of a human eye on the right, and an octopus eye on the left, and it's remarkably similar, and it got there on its own. So, you know, we both have a lens, we both have an iris. The one thing though that the octopus eye is better than the human eye is we all have a blind spot, and that blind spot is where all of those optic nerves goes back through our eye, in the back of our eye, and kind of puts a break in those photoreceptor cells that we have lining the back of our eye that allows us to see. Octopus nerves, their optic nerves, are behind that layer of photoreceptor cells that allows them to see. So they don't have a blind spot, whereas we do. So they did it slightly better. So connected to sight is this incredible ability to camouflage. So this is a series of pictures taken by my former PhD advisor, Roy Caldwell. And this is the same octopus. Each photo was taken 13 milliseconds apart. It's the same octopus, and it goes from I don't know if you can see my my arrow, but it goes from the sequence of photos was this upper left to upper right to lower left to lower right in half a second. So it's not just color, it's also the texture of their skin that they're able to change. This is my favorite video ever. So there is an octopus in this shot. It is from 1999, so quality is not as great as we're used to. But see when you can detect the octopus. It's there. And the video will go slow motion reverse. So you can kind of see this moment where the octopus just disappears. And again, it's not just the color, it's also the texture that they're able to manipulate, the texture of their skin that they're able to change to match their environment, and really just this way that is completely unmatched anywhere in the animal kingdom. So here's the slow motion reverse. And there's just this moment where it kind of disappears. Usually I'm getting a lot of oohs and ahs in the audience. I'm just pretending that I hear that in my head. There you go. So we see this incredible ability to match their background near perfectly. Their eyes are structured almost identically to ours. So one can hypothesize that they must have amazing color vision. Now, first I gotta talk a little bit about how we see color. We see color, we have three types of proteins in our eyes that allow us to see color. And in general, the more of these proteins you have, the more discernment you're able to tell. The more discernment you're able to tell between colors. So for example, humans, we have three: red, green, and blue. Dogs have two. So dogs aren't, often we call dogs colorblind. They're not colorblind, they just don't have the ability to discern between wavelengths of light. So each protein is responsible for taking in the information of light from different parts of the visible spectrum of light. Well, visible to humans, right? We like to name everything relative to us. So dogs just don't have the ability to discern color as much as we can. Some butterflies have six of these proteins. A couple of these are often in the UV range. The mantis shrimp, if you're not familiar with the mantis shrimp, that's a YouTube rabbit hole. You can definitely go down. They're an incredible animal. Some of them have 16 of these proteins. There actually was a very recent paper came out looking at their eyes are more like insect eyes. So they're compartmentalized. And a recent paper just came out demonstrating that while they have 16 proteins that cover, and 4 of them I think is in the UV spectrum, their brain isn't capable of combining that information together. So they actually don't see that many colors, but it's still kind of cool and impressive. Now, this is usually the point, if I'm live, where I make people guess how many proteins I think the octopus has. I'm going to pretend that I hear lots of different guesses. They have one. So they have the ability to see light and detect light, but they have no ability within their eyes to tell the differences between colors, tell the differences between the different wavelengths of light, which is wild considering what they're capable of doing. So this has baffled scientists for a very long time. The current evidence suggests, and the evidence is growing and growing and growing, there's been a couple papers that have come out lately, is that their skin, the skin itself can see color. Some of these opsins, these proteins in our eyes, they have in their skin. So we're still trying to figure out, there's also, if any of you are photographers, there's this concept called chromatic aberration that I'm not going to embarrass myself and try to explain it, but I put it up there, but it has to do with the shape of their eye. Their eyes are often these like U-shaped, and that could be contributing to the ability to detect color as well, but just crazy. All right. Now, and a lot of people ask me, okay, they see really well, but they don't discern color very well. What's their hearing like? So here is a spectrum of hearing, or a spectrum of hertz. Us humans, we're kind of existing in the 40 to 22,000 hertz range-ish. Dogs have a much wider range of hearing than we do. So a dog whistle is going to be up in that 30 to 40,000 hertz range, where our ears are incapable of hearing that, but their ears are. Octopus have a tiny little hearing range. This is actually not even to scale. I think it's supposed to be like between 20 and 80 hertz. So if I actually made it to scale, you wouldn't be able to see the line. So hearing is not something that is particularly useful for them, but they have a lot of other incredible, crazy senses. All right. And then finally, because here's another cool party trick to teach your friends, is reproduction. So the way you tell the sex of an octopus is by looking at their third right arm. And the way you determine which is the third right arm and not the third left arm is by orienting the octopus in front of you, as this picture is, with the eyes up. So the eyes are up here, finding that plane of symmetry and counting 1, 2, 3 to the right. Now in females, all of the arms look identical, but in males, that third right arm has a specialized structure called a ligula, which is the tip of the arm has kind of a distinctive spoon-like shape, and then a groove down the side of the arm called a hectocotylus, which is essentially a sperm conveyor belt. And the octopus the male will insert that sex arm into the female and deposit sperm. They're the only cephalopod in this group, this squid, cuttlefish, nautilus, octopus group, that does true internal fertilization. And yeah, so this might not play. So this is a video of me kind of describing the process of identifying an octopus. You can also see this octopus has lost part of one of its arms. And that's super, super common for those of you who have seen my octopus teacher. Kind of my one big, issue with, not issue, but like the thing that I think he probably over dramatized was the loss of that arm. It's very common. It's super common. I rarely collect an octopus so that's me finding the third arm and looking all the way down. This one was particularly a female because the tip of that arm was fine. But yeah, happens all the time. Super common. And they grow it back. They have this amazing ability to grow it back. So yeah, that was a little over dramatized in the documentary. So one thing that is really interesting too about octopus, especially now we've talked about these incredible adaptations they have, their intelligence, they only live for 1 to 2 years. The bigger octopus, like the giant Pacific octopus, which is the largest octopus species in the world, they live 4 to 5 in captivity, maybe 5, 6 to 7, but most octopus live a year or 2. And they also have this reproductive cycle called semilparity, semiparis, which means they reproduce once and then they die, like salmon. They reproduce and then they die. The females will lay eggs, kind of take care of them. Once her babies hatch, she dies. We are iteroparous species, meaning we reproduce multiple times in our lifetime. So they are a live fast, die young kind of animal, which is weird to think about in terms of all of their amazing abilities. It still is something that is kind of puzzled scientists. All right, so this is my audience participation part of the talk. Julie is going to be my volunteer. So this is my Choose Your Own Adventure Octopus game. For those of you who remember those Choose Your Own Adventure books, I made my own octopus game. So Julie, I'm going to call on you to make a series of decisions. You are an octopus looking for a new den. Where would you like to look? Under the pier or in the kelp forest?
In the kelp forest.
All right, we are in the kelp forest. You have found this cave. The cave looks inviting. Would you like to check it out? Or that seems too risky and scary, you're going to crawl along the reef instead?
Crawl along the reef.
Oh, the reef is covered in sponges and you do not like that feeling. You have very sensitive skin. Would you like to swim out into the open water or hide behind this weird tube thing?
Hide behind the weird tube thing.
Oh no, you've hidden behind a scuba diver. Would you like to go into the kelp or escape into those rocks?
Escape into the rocks.
Congratulations, you have found a perfect new den to live in. So I won't go through it again, but there's a series of various options. It is available on my website. Sounds like a joke, but it's true. It's on my website. Have some fun for a wild Friday night with your friends, and see what it's like to be an octopus. So, and you know, the game is fun. I think it's fun, but it really is kind of what I'm trying to understand in my research. I want to know what's going on inside the head of an octopus. I want to know what information it's taking in that allows it to make certain decisions. Why does it go over there when it goes over there? Why does it stay here and eat all these abalone? How did it even find the abalone in the first place? So I want to know how it takes in all of these different pieces of information together to make decisions. So I'm going to talk first a little bit about the octopus movement around Catalina Island. And first I want to talk about movement. Why study movement? Movement is really informative. So let's pretend you don't know me at all and you alien abduct me and you put a tracker in me and then you just see where I go. You don't ask me questions, you have Google Maps, you're just seeing where I go. So one day, okay, I go to the coffee shop, go to work, or I go to see if maybe I work there, maybe I don't. Grocery store, frozen yogurt shop, I wanted a snack, get back home. Oh, dog park, I might have a dog. So knowing nothing about me, you know that I have a caffeine addiction, you know that I have a dog, you know, maybe where I work, who knows, you know. And then as you collect more movement data over and over and over again, you start to solidify some of these things. So maybe on day 2, I go to the same building. Okay, growing hypothesis that is my work. I maybe have frozen yogurt addiction, definitely have an energetic dog. So just by looking where I go, you can learn a lot about who I am. So I apply that same concept, but instead with octopuses. And unfortunately, I don't have a Google Maps of the ocean that helps me tell where the octopus restaurant is, where the octopus home is. So it's just a matter of putting those puzzle pieces together by tracking their movement kind of over and over again. Yeah, so this is maybe that's the food place, maybe that's the shelter place, who knows. So when a lot of people think, well, especially a lot of people not in California, think about the ocean, think about marine science, this is what they think of: beautiful, pristine waters where you can see 100 feet, no problem. In California, in my work, it's most often like this. I took this picture of a scuba class I was teaching, and we were making them do math underwater because we can. But this was the visibility. It's not great a lot of the times. So what that means is that I can't just sit and watch an octopus and see where it goes and stay at a distance. I have to find ways to track its movements to help me understand where it goes when I can't be in the water watching it all the time. So I use this technique called acoustic telemetry. And the basic concept of it, there's a transmitter, there's a receiver. The transmitter makes some type of sound, some type of coded sound, and the receiver receives it and records that information. If we want GPS location, you have a satellite that is talking to the transmitter, talking to the receiver, and allowing the receiver to calculate position. Now, a very annoying thing about the ocean, if I could change one thing, is that GPS does not work underwater. It would make my life so much easier if I could just give an octopus an iPhone and, you know, see where it goes, but GPS does not work underwater. So we have to develop this workaround. So if the transmitter is underwater and the receiver is underwater, they can't talk to the satellite. This works for whales because whales come to the surface, and if there's a tracker on a whale comes to the surface, that's when the transmitter can talk to the satellite and then talk to the receiver and get that information. But my octopus are never going to do that. So I have to put a tracker in the brain, or not in the brain, but a tracker in my octopus, and set up a system that allows me to kind of calculate their movements without the use of satellite, without the use of GPS in real time. So the process by which we do that is we catch the octopus. This is a video of me catching. I'm gonna fast forward a little bit here. So we use, okay, so the octopus is in there. So we use vinegar, just plain white vinegar, to entice them out of their den, you know, totally safe for the environment, safe for the animal, but they do have very sensitive skin. So they don't like it. And it kind of, you know, they come out. There is this moment when I'm teaching my dive buddies and staff how to collect octopus, how to catch octopus, you have, patience is really important, because there's this moment, they'll come out of their den, they haven't fully committed yet. They're not fully out yet. And if you grab them too soon and they still are like too committed to their den, they'll just go back in and you're never going to get them out. But there's this moment where they commit to leaving, they commit to, okay, I'm going to go. And that's when you grab them. So it's a lot of paying attention to their behavior and patience, lots and lots of patience. Oh, sorry, I didn't switch it far enough. So this was, yeah, so this is in the process of collecting an octopus to put a acoustic tracker. You're going to see the octopus come out in kind of the middle top. Oh, there it goes by one of the pink flags, and ooh, anyway, that's me grabbing it. You see that it inks quite a bit. That is one of their defense mechanisms as well. And then we bring them up to the surface to measure them and tag them. All right, so once they are caught, we bring them up. We put this tracker, this transmitter in them. Fortunately, octopus have a natural open cavity. So I can just kind of put that transmitter inside them without having to cut them, without having to do any kind of surgical procedure. It has we cover these two pegs that we cover with sterile piercing needles that go through their skin, and then we secure it for the other side of their skin like an earring, like an earring. And it's relatively small. It's only about 1% to 5% of the animal's weight. And you know, I often get questions about, okay, does it affect their ability to move and squeeze into tiny places? And it's entirely possible. We are manipulating the animal. There's no guarantee that we're looking at 100%, you know, unmanipulated behavior, but you know, we're doing what we can. This one might be too long. It's a little gnarly, but it's pretty fast. It's, you know, less than a minute. There's a sterile piercing needles. Oh no, I'm getting your internet is unstable. Okay. Anyway, so when it's all said and done, it looks a little bit like that. And this allows me to, oh yeah, so then once they're tagged, we release them back into the same den that we got them from. we found that they leave that den pretty quick because bad things happen there, run away. And then we track. So this particular technique is called, so this one I'm going to describe first is called active acoustic telemetry. And it requires me and a friend, this is one of my co-authors and friends, Kelly, on a boat with a GPS unit with us on the boat above the water, and then a hydrophone that allows us to detect the position of the octopus. So it's octopus talking to us talking to the satellite, and then by following that signal and making sure that signal stays strong and taking GPS coordinates through the process allows us as the boat to track the direction that the octopus is going. So we've done this on Catalina Island. We learned a couple cool things. One is males and females don't tend to move about the same. We were tagging, females that hadn't laid eggs. I imagine that if a female has eggs and all denned up, she's not going to move very much, but males and females moved about the same. Bigger animals covered larger distances than smaller animals do. And kind of a little bit of a surprise was this amount of movement in day versus night was the same. We think of octopus a lot, with a few exceptions, of being like nocturnal animals. But my sense is that they kind of move when they need to. It's coming back to that idea of taking in all that sensory information and making decisions. And I think that if all that information is coming in and telling them it's safe to move in the day, they'll move in the day. So that is pretty cool. This is the map that we generated for this project. We were able to track 9 different octopuses throughout this area on Catalina Island. And this is this is the California 2-spot octopus. They don't get super big, like maybe 1 to 2 pounds. So not like the giant Pacific octopus that we're used to seeing in aquariums. But for a small octopus, they move a lot. They covered a much larger area than octopuses of equivalent size in other parts of the world. So this particular species, Octopus bimaculatus, or the 2-spot octopus, is a mobile octopus, which has implications for this next part I'm going to talk about, which is octopus response to abalone stocking or abalone restoration. All right, so we were talking about this a little bit before, kind of as the meeting was starting, but I have had to adjust how I talk about this a little bit, because especially the younger generation has never heard of an abalone before. We used to have a fishery in California. The commercial fishery closed in 1996-97, and there was a recreational red abalone fishery in Northern California, north of San Francisco, but that has been hopefully temporarily closed due to environmental conditions in, I believe, 2018. So a lot of people never have, I think, the privilege of seeing an abalone. And I like to try to convince people that they're cute. They're adorable. Look at that face. You can see it has 2 little eyes and its little tentacles, little antenna. Cute. Like I mentioned, so this is me and my dad and my husband abalone fishing in Northern California. Like I said, I grew up in Northern California. My dad is a diver. I'm a diver. My grandpa's a diver. And this was a big part of my heritage. A big part of my culture within my family is going up and collecting abalone. And for those who have eaten it, it's a whole big hullabaloo, right? You have to slice it and pound it, and it's a big family gathering. It's some of my favorite memories. But the problem is that historically, when the commercial fishery was around, we just took too much. There's thought that abalone were just this abundant, never-ending, impossible to be depleted resource, and we took too much. And one of the big reasons why this has mattered and why we are seeing some of the species of abalone become endangered is that they are what we call broadcast spawners. So broadcast spawners are opposite of octopus. We just talked about octopus that meet up, internal fertilization, things that we as humans are familiar with. But abalone release their eggs and their sperm into the water column, and then hopefully eggs and sperm meet up and make a baby. This works if the populations are big enough, are dense enough, that you have a neighbor nearby that your egg or your sperm can match up with. The situation we have now is a much lower densities of octopus, much lower densities of abalone. Oh, there's my dog. And because they are too far apart, then they're not able to successfully reproduce. Even though there are reproductive males and females out there, they're just not close enough together. And this is what we're seeing, especially with the white abalone, which was the first marine invertebrate to be placed on the endangered species list. It was placed on the endangered species list in 2001. It's also one of NOAA's species in the spotlight, which I like to highlight. And this species in the spotlight action plan has been updated for 2021 to 2025. So I need to update my picture. But one of the reasons why I like to highlight the species in the spotlight program is because it's also the only invertebrate in the program. I think there's 9 and we're the only invertebrate. But it's not just animals that are on the brink of extinction and it's a terrible, sad story. They're on the brink of extinction, but we know enough that we can actually prevent them from going extinct. We know enough to actually do something about it. And the part of this project that I'm involved in is, so we have partners who grow them in the lab, our captive breeding facility. And then the part that I'm involved in is the stocking, is once they're grown in the wild, once they're grown in the lab, release them out in the wild to try to create sustained, dense enough populations where they can reproduce on their own, and then we can back away and kind of let them do their thing. So I have the pleasure of working with an incredible team. This is a huge project with tons and dozens of people involved, all fighting for this weird little snail. And we've done this a few times now in Southern California and a few sites throughout Southern California where we've put these lab-reared abalone out in the wild and tracked their progress. This is an ongoing thing. It will be ongoing for probably the next 10 to 15 years. So I got, job security. Because abalone are slow growing. It takes them about a decade to reach 7 inches, which is legal size, and the red abalone recreational fishery in the north. So they're slow growing. We're in it for the long haul. But one thing that we learned pretty quickly is that octopus love to eat our abalone. And that shell picture on the right, you can see an octopus drill hole. So octopus have the ability to drill a hole through the shell, and drill is a little bit of a misnomer. They actually use their radula, which is a rasping tongue. It's something that all mollusks, the phylum that they're in, mollusca, has in common. So snails have this too. Never mind. So they don't really drill through, they kind of lick. They lick a hole through the shell. And once they're through the shell, they can inject a toxin called cephalotoxin, which is a neurotoxin that only affects invertebrate nervous systems. So if it bites a human, which, full disclosure, I have been bit many times, but it's not dangerous to us as humans, but it's dangerous if you're an abalone because the toxin is very specific to an invertebrate nervous system. And it causes the abalone to kind of paralyze, and then they can just pop them off the rock with no big deal. So we've also set up time-lapse cameras on these areas where we've released abalone to see what happens. I don't know if you can see the octopus in the picture, but it's right there, just waiting for those delicious, tasty abalone. So, predation is natural. We're not trying to stop predation entirely, but what we're trying to do is kind of mitigate the predation in these early stages when we first move them from the lab to the ocean, and they're stressed and they're freaked out because they had this nice comfy gig in the lab and now they're been kicked out of the real world. We want to give them ease this transition as much as possible and try to reduce that initial mortality that we see as much as we're able to. This was one of our experiments where we had a couple sites where we put abalone out, one site where we didn't put any abalone and just tracked the predators to see what happened. So right here is right here is where we also removed some octopus from the area as well. So right here is where we removed octopus and put the abalone out there. And then this is 1 week after. So the blue is our control site. The blue represents the site that did not receive any abalone, and the pink and the orange are the sites that did receive abalone. So there was a very clear increase of octopus in the area, and just went whoosh, right. You know, they heard the dinner bell ringing and they came running. But what's interesting is when we've repeated this, so that first study was in the LA area. When we repeated this in the San Diego area at different sites, we didn't see the same reaction. So here is that same time point. So that's the peak of octopus we saw was 1 week after releasing the abalone. This arrow indicates that 1 week after releasing the abalone in this second experiment, and we didn't see the response. So why? This goes back to my question of, okay, well, how do they find it, and what information are they taking in that is having them go to certain places? Can we find an area where the abalone can thrive but the octopus don't really go to? It's understanding these more complex behaviors of octopus that will help with this octopus mitigation as we move forward with our abalone restoration project. All right, so the third and final study I'm going to share with you is, we're back to movement, understanding movement. Again, can we find this magical spot where octopus won't go but abalone love? Did some more alien abduction of octopus, but this time I used a tracking technique called passive acoustic telemetry. So it didn't require me and my friend Kelly to be on a boat for 24 hours at a time. We put out a series of receivers in the environment. That's what these black things represent. A series of receivers where we know where we dropped them, so we have known GPS coordinates. Put trackers in the octopus, or put transmitters in the octopus. And then if 3 receivers detect that transmitter in that octopus, then it can calculate the position using a technique called triangulation. It's kind of what Google is doing right now to know exactly where you are. But this allowed me to get more precise movement of octopus over a longer period of time without me having to be in the boat. And then we had this grand plan of, we were going to track the octopus before we put the abalone in the water, put the abalone in and see how their movement changed, see how their behavior changed. How long was it going to take them to find the abalone? How long were they going to stay there? Things like that. This was down in San Diego. We set up a series of receivers that covered a fairly large area. I was very excited. This was all for my postdoc work. We had this, like I said, this grand plan. We're going to tag some octopus in June and July. This was initial octopus surveys to make sure that we actually had octopus we could tag. Cool. There were lots of octopus. Set up the receiver network in August. Tag some octopus in November. Release some abalone in January, tag 40 octopus, see what happens. But sometimes science says no. This was a very humbling experience for me, where I had these grand plans and nothing went right. The octopus, we couldn't find the octopus, so we were attempting to tag 40. We just could, after we set up the array, we just couldn't find them. So we were able to tag 8. Of those 8, 4 lost their tag completely. One thing I didn't mention, the annoying thing about octopus is that if they don't want the tag on them, they can reach inside themselves and pull it out, or reach inside themselves and undo the screws that connect it and pull it out. We learned to glue down the screw, the bolts, but and the nuts, but they're tricky. 4 of them left our detectable area, left our detectable array entirely, so we completely lost track of them. And we actually only got good positions on 2. So where my goal was to have 40, we got 2, and they left, and after we got positions on these 2, they left the detectable area of the array before we even put the abalone out there. So we still learned a whole bunch. It was a bit of a bust, but sometimes science is like that, and we carry on. So here are our the 2 animals we got tracks on. We named them, of course, so this is Bernie and Alpha. Bernie, we got 5 days of movement, and Alpha, we got 21 days of movement, which is pretty good. Yeah, so learned a lot. Kind of a womp womp experiment, but such is life. All right, so that is ongoing work. We're continuing to add more abalone in the ocean. I'm continuing to track octopus and their movement to learn more about that interaction, what drives the octopus, what drives their behavior, and then hopefully apply that to the endangered abalone restoration. So the very last thing I want to talk about before we open it up to as many questions as you'd like to ask me is this why should we care question. And I think there's a number of reasons. And I'm going to go through kind of my 4 favorites. 1 is conservation, 2 is fisheries, 3 is evolutionary insights, and 4 is bio-inspiration. So the conservation thing I've kind of talked your ear off about already. If we didn't specifically look at octopus interaction with abalone, it could seriously hinder our ability to successfully restore this endangered species of abalone, the white abalone. So understanding their behavior, what drives their movement is a crucial component in ensuring that this program that is, many different organizations and dozens of scientists is successful. One other thing I'm interested in and have been doing some work in is octopus interaction with fisheries. This is a worldwide problem of especially trap-based crustacean fisheries. Fisherman puts down the trap, catch a crab, catch a lobster. While the trap is still down there, octopus crawls in because as we discussed earlier, octopus can squeeze into tiny holes. If an octopus wants to get in, it's gonna get in. You're not gonna be able to keep an octopus out. Octopus crawls into the trap, eats the lobster, eats the crab, crawls out. Poor fisherman pulls up the trap, and and there's just an empty shell of what used to be a lobster. And this is happening in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Florida, Alaska. This is a worldwide problem. And it affects the way the fisheries behave. It affects the sustainability of the fishery. The scientist in me just thinks it's a very cool opportunity to learn more about octopus and their movements and how they discover food and make those decisions. But getting a better sense of this interaction, octopuses in these crustacean fisheries, could help with the sustainability of these fisheries and help fishermen behavior, and it could affect a lot of changes. And I've already briefly touched on this with when I talked about the eyes, but here's the tree of life. Here's where the octopuses are, and here's where we are. We are very, very distant on the tree of life. We are very far apart, and yet we have some remarkable similarities, not only with our eye structure, but with our intelligence. I can open up a jar and an octopus can open up a jar, and sometimes I can go through a maze and an octopus can go through a maze. Why? What was similar about our evolutionary conditions, about the way natural selection acted on our ancestors as we evolved, that made octopuses need to be so smart and made us need to be so smart? So studying something that is so far removed from us on the tree of life can give us a lot of insight into our own evolution and why we are who we are, which I think is very cool. And then the final thing is bio-inspiration. This is just neat. So this video is a little old. I'm sure I could find an updated version, but this is a octopus robot. One of the cool things too about octopus is the way that they move is called hydrostatic movement. So we, in our bones, which get in the way, have a very limited range of motion, right? We don't have full motion ability because of our skeletal system. Octopus don't have that. We do have one thing on our bodies that moves in the same way that an octopus does. This is also usually where I ask the audience if they can guess, but it's our tongues. Our tongue, the way that we can move our tongue and the musculature and the way that the fluids move through our tongue is the same type of way that octopuses control themselves. So can you imagine a robot that doesn't have the limitations of a skeletal system, that doesn't have, that's just cool. So we can learn a lot by nature and how we develop, our own technologies and move forward. And octopus have been the inspiration for a lot of those things. All right, so This is a kelp forest picture. I love the kelp forest. I think California ecosystem, the California coastal ecosystem is the most beautiful in the whole world. And I feel very privileged to be able to spend my career studying this ecosystem and ensuring that it stays healthy for generations to come. So yes, I am happy to take questions. That's my website. If you want to play my super rad octopus game, and an email. And then if you're on Instagram, that's my Instagram handle. But I not only post about octopus, I also post about quilts because I'm a quilter. So, all right, yeah, and I am happy to take any questions.
If you want to stop screen sharing so that we can see the participants a little bit better, that would be great. And then, so if you have a question, let's just try unmute yourself. And if you get the floor first, ask your question, and we'll see how that works.
I'll ask one. What is rugosity?
Oh, rugosity. I don't even remember that I had that word in my presentation. Rugosity is habitat complexity. So something that is, like a flat rock, something that's really flat has low rugosity. Something with a lot of boulders and a lot of rock structure has really high rugosity. So one of the things we're looking at is, where's that perfect level of habitat complexity specifically for abalone restoration? Because if there's too many hidey holes, if it's too rugose, then that's a lot of places for predators to hide and get them. But if it's too flat, then there's no places for the abalone to hide. So we're kind of doing a little bit of a Goldilocks thing with a lot of the abalone work.
It was on one of your charts. And the other question I have is, are octopuses doing well? Are any of the species threatened or endangered?
It's a great question. As far as we understand, they're doing well, we think. The problem with octopus is they're very hard to find. They're very hard to see. There's not a whole lot of good population data on them because it takes a lot of work to actually get good numbers. There are a few octopus species that we are concerned about because they are actively caught for the aquarium trade, but in general, they do pretty good, and we're finding that's true for a lot of cephalopods. So with the exception of the Nautilus, which is our only shelled cephalopod that remains. I don't know if I wore my little Nautilus necklace tonight, which is just outside of the screen, so you can't see it. But they grow so fast, and they're semipairs, so they reproduce once and then they die. So there was a really important and interesting paper that came out, I believe, in 2015, so it's been a few years now, looking at global cephalopod fishery landings, and where a lot of these species that we're fishing, their populations are going down and down and down and down, and landings, how much we fish, how much we take from the ocean is going down and down and down and down. Squid, cuttlefish, and octopus are going up. So it's this weird, and we still don't know a whole lot about it, but it kind of makes sense because they can adapt really quickly because they're so smart. So they can make changes in their behavior that help their survival. They grow really fast if they're only living 1 or 2 years. They reproduce. They release, thousands and thousands of eggs. So they seem to be doing okay. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Allie. First of all, love the presentation. Octopuses are my favorite animal, so I was really pumped on this. My question for you is, I have read before that octopuses have learned recognition. So for example, if one person would walk into the room in a red dress, like I guess they're colorblind, so not necessarily a red dress, but one person walked into a room and another person walked in the same room with the same dress on, they would recognize that they were two different people. Is that true? Or can you elaborate on that a little bit?
As far as we understand, it's true. What gets a little tricky, so one of the more cutting edge places of octopus research is understanding just that, understanding personality of octopus, understanding, their ability to recognize humans and kind of that complex interaction, specifically with something like personality. The hard thing is that when you have something that is so variable as personality and has so many facets and dimensions, you have to have a really large sample size. If you think about, if I were to do a study just on me and my sister, I might come to some very biased conclusions because we have a lot of similarities. Whereas if I, did some study with 1,000 people across the country, you might get a better sense of what's actually happening. And that's been some of the challenge with octopus, is getting enough sample size to kind of find the pattern in the noise. But a lot of the reason why I mentioned personality is that a lot of studies that have kind of in that realm of, recognizing humans and personality have been inspired by interactions of aquarists with their octopus. That's a really unique situation. I don't see these same octopus every day, but an aquarist does. And so they're starting to recognize these possible behaviors, which then inspire more kind of rigorous studies, which, I'll then sometimes get a little fuzzy and a little bit messy. My gut is that they can. We know that they have the ability to learn and remember for long periods of time. They have the ability to make associations between certain things, between positive things and negative things. So I think it's entirely possible that they can recognize individual humans. I honestly would be surprised if they didn't.
Awesome, thanks.
I have a couple of questions, if I may. Does Greek cuisine take a big bite out of the population?
So we, globally, if you look at cephalopod fisheries around the world, octopus are the least eaten of the types. Number one is squid. Squid are very widely caught both for human food, for bait, for a lot of things. Next on the list are cuttlefish. That's not something that, if you've really only eaten cuisine in the United States, you might think it's wild to eat cuttlefish, but places like in Europe and in Southeast Asia, very common to have, cuttlefish fried rice and cuttlefish. So that's actually a really highly fished group of cephalopods as well. And then octopus are a little bit lower on the list. The amount that we fish is not quite so high. So so if you look regionally, Europe and the Mediterranean Sea has a pretty high fishery activity, as does the West Pacific. We as Americans we don't have an octopus fishery in California. We take a lot of squid. But yeah, it's not a huge part of American cuisine, but it is in other parts of the world, yes.
Right. And the other question is, what about taste and smell? Are they an important perception organ?
Yeah, so they, so there's my dog. So smell is a little different in the ocean. They have chemoreceptors throughout their body, which is essentially what we have in our nose and our sinus system, to be able to kind of detect various molecules in the water. What is their most developed part of that, though, is their sense of taste, because their entire suckers are all covered with taste buds. They are tasting everything that they touch. Whether or not they have kind of long distance chemoreception, long distance, smell, is not something we know or understand yet. They hunt in a way called chemotactile hunting, which is really they're just kind of moving around and sticking their arms in rocks and feeling for stuff and tasting it. And is this food? Oh, okay, yeah, it is. Oh, this is not food. And then using their eyes to look up for predators while their arms are, doing their thing. So taste is much, much more evolved and very much an important part of how they hunt and how they exist.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Can I ask another question?
Sure, I'll go for it.
Okay. So I have also heard octopuses kind of developing certain, I guess, cultures in different areas that they live. For example, they are able to, like, as you say, like they're really easily adaptable to different areas. And if octopuses are able to stay in a specific area for a longer period of time, which normally they don't, they are able to develop like a sense of like culture within that area. So like adapting specific methods of hunting and able to pass that down. Have you like read any studies on that or?
Yeah, so one of the coolest studies was this community of octopuses that end up staying in the same spot. And the scientists who discovered it, it's in Australia, it's called Octopolis. They named it Octopolis. So if you Google Octopolis, you'll find lots of information about it. They posted a few studies, but it's very cool because one of the things I like about octopus is that just when you think you know what's going on, they throw something else at you and you realize you have no idea what's going on. Because we used to have this perception that octopuses were, very solitary, didn't really like to live with, near one another. They're typically, we describe them as asocial, so they're not antisocial. They don't avoid each other, but they don't seek each other out either. They're just kind of whatever. But then scientists found this community in Australia where, octopuses are living in very high density in these kind of shell enclosures, and they were not enclosures, these like shell piles. And they were able to observe, interactions and fights between, neighbors and things that were very much familiar to humans, fighting with your neighbors, fighting with your siblings. I like this octopus more than that octopus. So, kind of discovering that area has really, I think, inspired a lot of new and exciting questions. Just what aren't we seeing? There's so much more out there. There's so much more that octopuses are doing that we just haven't observed yet. And I think that's very exciting.
That's awesome. Cool. Thanks.
Sorry, do we have a final question tonight? All right, I'll ask it then, which is, I was interested that their hearing is so minimal. And I've always thought of the ocean as maybe a different kind of a soundscape, but definitely where sound plays a big role. So can you talk a little bit about that? Why is it so minimal in terms of their, their experience?
Yeah, it all kind of comes down to what ends up being important for that species to be able to do what they need to do. You think about a whale, and so much of their communication and how they've evolved is so dependent on their ability to make sound and hear sound on lots of different scales. Their vision, not so great, because as they evolved, sound was sound was the trait that was selected for that helped build their pods, helped build their communication. For octopuses, hearing and sound, through whatever selective pressures they experienced, that was an important thing for them. And octopuses that could hear better did not make more babies. They did not pass that trait down through the generations. But what they did and what contributed to their ability to be successful as a species were these things like eyesight and camouflage and ability to manipulate their objects. So it's really interesting to see kind of what you can look at it on one extreme end of like a cave fish that lives in the dark and de-evolved, essentially lost their eyes entirely because the eyes were useless. Whereas you have something like an eagle where sight is so important for their ability to survive just based on their evolutionary path, that's incredibly attuned in them. So you can really look at any species and see what is strong in them and what is weak in them, and put it together with how they live their life and how they survive to get a sense of what's important to them. So yeah, so the simple answer is for octopus, as they evolved, sound just wasn't important to them. Other things were.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hofmeister, for such a fascinating program. I'd like to also thank Julie Maxey Allison, who is our Special Events Committee Chair, for organizing tonight's DMF talks, and to another of our board members, Hilton Lonstein, for his work on the tech and communications end of this. And again, go to our website, delmarfoundation.org, and within a couple of days, if you would like to revisit any of this very fascinating presentation. And with that, I wish everyone a good evening and hope to see you at a live event sometime this year. Good night, one and all.